In 2020, Thrasio raised hundreds of millions of dollars and lots of eyebrows, and then the floodgates opened. By 2021, tens of billions of dollars had been raised for as many as 100 Amazon aggregators, and everyone was doing it. By 2022, the COVID bump waned, that door slammed shut, the supply chain issues went from not having enough inventory to too much inventory, and the magic was gone, just like that. Then the aggregators around that same time learned what our guest today and I learned a long time ago. Amazon is different, it's hard, and it's all about the brand. Welcome to the Day 2 podcast. Today, I've invited my first Day 2 repeat guest to talk about Amazon aggregators, brand building, his big predictions, and how they can impact your brand in 2023. I'm Jason Boyce, founder and CEO of Avenue 7 Media and host of the Day 2 podcast. And with me today is my good friend, James Kelly, a former Amazon insider, current Amazon and DTC seller, and amazing brand builder. James, how was your holidays? And what city are you in today? I can never keep up.
Oh man, holidays were great. Limped to the finish line at Christmas and then just licked my wounds for 2 weeks. I'm currently in Glacier, Washington, outside of Mount Baker, which is a little ski town outside of Bellingham.
Are you in a different Airbnb every month these days?
I've decided I can't do the multi, like the 1 month. So I've been doing like 4 months minimum, but I'm on my fourth in the last year and a half. So yeah, I'm doing the same thing as you, but in slow motion. It's
great to connect again. And, we had a couple of talks over the holidays, and you were mentioning that you had a friend who recently sold to an aggregator and then went to work for an aggregator, and they shared some interesting insights with you. So, I'd love to hear your take. And also the second part of that question is, you had an exit last year. Did you sell to an aggregator or was it a private brand?
No, I sold to an aggregator as well. So that's been another kind of lens into that world. But I've been paying a lot of attention, for the last year, because it's kind of been the big multi-year trend in our space was the rise of the aggregators and the aggregator money and what were they doing? And, was that a potential source of opportunity for us? And so, it's been this kind of, this thing I think we've all been paying a ton of attention to. The general topic of aggregators has felt like this huge thing to pay attention to for a few years. And now it just feels like it went from being everywhere to just disappearing. As far as like headlines go, no one's raising money anymore. I haven't heard much about people getting bought. It's really slowed down. And so, trying to figure out what's the shift and where's it going and what does that mean for, the brands that I have left or, my other friends operating brands. It's just been a big focus. I've been really curious what's been going on.
The press really likes that classic Greek tragedy, right? And I got to tell you, I think Sam Bankman-Fried at FTX stole all the air out of the room. And among other things going on in the world headlines, but aggregators were everywhere in the headlines, starting back like we outlined in the teaser, 2020 and then 2021 and then 2022. I was getting a lot of calls from press saying, "Have you heard anything? Has anyone died yet?" Press wants that. They want that Greek tragic story. And so, first of all, what is the state of the Amazon aggregators? And number two, as it relates to sellers who are looking to sell, is it still a good idea to sell my business to an aggregator, or should I hang in there a little longer or go find a strategic or sell to another brand? Those are some of the things that have been coming across my Zoom calls and in-person meetings over the last many months. I mean, have you been hearing similar chatter?
The things I've been seeing in the aggregator space has been, the general trend is multiple reduction, right? So if you were getting 5x of, what they call adjusted margin, a year and a half ago, you might be getting 2 to 3 now. They're probably looking a lot harder at your pullouts. So what are the things that you're getting to include in your margin versus not include? If you used to say like, "Hey, I'm the founder and I take a salary, but that doesn't count because you have people," they're gonna be like, "Well, that actually does count." So you're getting beat up on the nominal, the number, and you're going to get beat up on the multiple of it. So I think that ultimately as a seller adds up to something like well, hey, I'm making 20% net profit on this business and I'm only going to get 2 to 3x that. That's not much of a payout for something you've probably spent 5 years of blood, sweat, and tears building. And you're like, well, or I could just hold this thing, keep, making money. And well, hey, now I feel motivated. What if I double down and like execute on those cool new product ideas I had, or do this or do that? Like I think for me and the people I know, it's sort of creating more motivation, right? The easy exit's gone. So what do you got to do? You got to fight your way out of the bag, So I think that's one trend.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at that, if you're doing a 2 or 3x of 20% margin, you're lucky to get half of your top line revenue as a valuation. And that's just not as attractive as it was during the gold rush. I'm often reminded there's always these gold rushes, right? And by the way, the aggregator space, which is this idea where there's a holding company that goes out and raises money and then goes out and buys similar assets and combines them together in one larger company. The Amazon aggregators didn't invent that. That's been going on with the private equity forever. And even before that, the big strategic brands were doing that as well. I'm reminded, the funny story that pops into my head, James, is, when I started a e-commerce direct-to-consumer business a year after the dot-com bust. And I remember going to shows and saying, hey, I'm an online seller. Let me sell your stuff. And they're like, the internet, that thing's dead. Right. And so, from my perspective, there's always this boom and bust. And then there's always people who survive. And, I guess I should say in full transparency, I'm on the board with Unibrands, and they're an amazing aggregator. They're doing all the things right. Right. And I know that there's a handful of others, but I think the easy money part is over. Look at the interest rates and what's happened this year. A lot of those aggregators were funded with debt. And it was free money at the time. But now that interest rate is not so free. And so the debt piece is problematic, is challenging. I'll share some rumors that I've been hearing in a minute. But yeah, I hear a lot of sellers who said, damn it, I should have sold in 21. And they're probably right.
Yeah, I think the exits are going to get less and less awesome, and you're going to realize you're in for the winter, and you're either going to write it down and then find a job, or you're going to like buckle down and come out the other side and be one of the survivors that makes it to the promised land. I think that's kind of the decision you got to make at this point.
And so overall, your experience selling to an aggregator, good? You got your check and you're happy?
Yeah, it actually went really well. We were the first acquisition of the aggregator after they had raised their money.
Oh wow!
So we haven't gotten
that's a good place to be.
Yeah, it was kind of fun going through it, and just kind of they obviously had operated Amazon brands, so they knew what they were doing, but there's a lot of processes that go into transferring a business, and so getting to figure all that out, it was kind of fun to be. I liked not feeling like I was part of a meat grinder, and we were kind of in it together, and so like we were doing all that stuff, and then. It's been interesting watching them over the year. They've rebranded, what strategies are they implementing, and kind of like judging from afar how that's doing. Cause like many folks, there's a performance kicker, right? So you're also watching like, don't fuck this up. I gotta.
Yeah. Right, James. That's a really good point, because back to the deals that are happening now versus a year or two ago, the covenants are outrageous. There's so much more. They're like, oh yeah, we'll buy your business. Number one, like you said, your dollar valuation is going to come down. Your multiple has been reduced. And by the way, we're going to put 5 or 6 things in here to cover our butts in case the economy absolutely crashes and burns. And that's where, if you're out there and you're shopping your business right now, you really got to pay attention to those performance metrics, to, and also to those covenants, and push back on those things. You may not get your deal done, but you don't want to sell your soul here and lose the value that you've created all these years by not paying attention to those tiny print covenants in your deal. And so I think there's more of those, at least what I'm hearing on the street. Some of them are absolutely outrageous, but these are just investors concerned about a macro environment, concerned about a potential big recession, and trying to cover their butts. So don't blame them.
I mean, I think, advice I would give to sellers shopping deals is it's probably the thing you want to do is to make the multiple or the payout calculation at the max, and hope for the best. But also, what's the mid and what's the worst? And if those covenants fall flat and in a year and a half, your multiple ended up being like a 1.2, are you going to be, how are you going to feel if that's the case? Because to your point, I mean, who knows what's going to happen this year? This stuff's entirely possible. And one of the other things that I've seen in this world is that, not all aggregators are created equally. If they can't operate, if they can't really run a business, then, they might not hit these targets and there's nothing you can do about it. And, that's going to fall back on the deal that you did. And, how are you going to feel if that happens? So I think a lot of these guys are finding that operating, to your point, operating these businesses it's not plug and play. Everyone's a different ball game. There's still a ton of competition out there. This is a tough market. So I think there's a lot of easy money that's finding out this is not an easy market.
I mean, if you think about it, you've got these performance metrics and your business is supposed to continue and hit a certain revenue number, but the aggregator has no idea how to do inventory projections and stay in stock. I mean, you could lose your money, right? And so, I mean, would you suggest that some of these sellers really grill and interview the aggregator and ask them what their operational capabilities are, ask them what their capital, how much they're willing to contribute to the growth of the brand, both in capital as well as marketing chops and branding and ad spend and all of those things? I mean, were you able to have any of those conversations, or even your friend, when you did your deal?
I think the mindset to take into it is probably different than it was 2 years ago, right? Like it was, I'm exiting, this is great. What's the, money situation of this entity? And I think now it's probably more like interviewing someone for you to make an investment in their business, because essentially you're evaluating their ability to return on your invested capital, and your capital is your asset of your business, right? And so you're trying to think about, do they actually have the ability to turn this capital I'm giving them into a return yielding asset, I guess. So,
that's great advice.
Yeah, you want to interview the CEO, right? Does this guy know what he's doing? What's his background? Is it a PE guy that's never run a business? Because that's probably not a great sign. What are the key? What the keys are to running an Amazon business, right? It's inventory management, it's advertising management, it's content creation. You want to talk to the people on each of those teams, make sure they have their head on straight. Like you said, how much money are they willing to invest in this thing? Another thing that you might want to ask about that I think is overlooked as well, which is changing rapidly this year, is what are the covenants on their debt? Because they may. What I'm hearing is going on is that these guys may have said they've raised $150 million to buy brands, but that debt was had strings attached, and so that's not money in a bank account. That's checks that are ready to be written given certain situations. So they may not actually have money to buy inventory, and they need to self-fund that. And so there's a lot of, I think you really got to mind the details on this stuff, where these deals may not end up looking as good as they do when they get signed, because I think they're under a lot of pressure to do deals, and so they're really still trying to buy businesses, but what happens after the deal is going to matter a lot.
And your friend who sold and then went to work for an aggregator, what do things look like on the other side of the table for him now that he's an employee of said aggregator that he sold his business to?
I think there's pros and cons, just like anything, right? I think the benefit to him is being able to, which sounds nice to me, right? Is he's now part of an organization. He gets to focus, right? Like, my responsibility is this thing. Someone else runs PPC. Someone else runs, this stuff. So I can spend all day, every day getting really good at this one thing. And I think that's probably nice, especially as a sole proprietor, where there's just too much, you can't ever do it all. I think that's probably, that's been a benefit. I think the downside is you're not in control anymore. Like, you may have said, I'm going to ride this recession out. I'm going to be conservative. I'm going to do, I know I can make X profit at Y spend. That's enough to cover my lifestyle. If you have $200 million in VC money behind you, you don't have that luxury. You have someone breathing down your neck You got to be showing growth. You got to be showing profit. You got to be showing this. What are you doing? There's quarterly calls, there's weekly calls, there's MBRs. It's that everything that's great about running a business, even though it's really, really hard, is gone because now you work for someone and they don't care who you are, if your kids get to see you at all.
And they're setting the agenda, not you.
Totally. So I think that's, that's kind of what I've observed, seeing my friends who've gone to aggregators.
The space in general, I'm going to run down a list here, James, of rumors that I have heard. And folks, these rumors have, I won't say rumor if I don't have multiple sources. All of them at least have two. Many of them have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 sources from different parts of the business. But, starting with one that I almost fell out of my chair that I heard sometime in Q4 last year was Thrashio's burning about $200 million in cash a quarter. And that's even after the new CEO, who had, really well respected out of Airbnb. I think he was prior Amazon from there. I mean, that is a lot of cash to be burning. And, I remember, James, all the way back when, back before I had my exit, when I sold the assets of my company, I talked to Thrasio and I was like, I don't understand this model. I've got 150 really great products doing 8 figures a year, and they're interested in this one product, and why not the rest? I couldn't figure it out. So they're really struggling, and they were the first. They were the big poster child that helped these other folks raise a lot of money. I'm hearing a lot of rumors that external consultants are being asked to sit in the meeting with the management teams of these aggregators to offer advice, to be a fly on the wall, because investors are nervous about their money. I'm hearing tons of stories about well-run aggregators being approached by aggregators who are in big trouble, begging them to buy and merge their businesses. One of the funniest quotes I heard from somebody, and this came, of course, secondhand, but someone actually said to a really good aggregator, "We want you to buy our company. We need to sell fast before our stock price goes to 0." And I'm like, that's not a good sales pitch. Yeah. So no wonder that aggregator wasn't very good to begin with. One of the folks that primed the pump for these acquisitions is Victory Park Capital. Now, I don't have any specific context over at Victory Park Capital, but in a multitude of conversations I've had with multiple sources, these guys lent a lot of money. Perch comes to mind. And they have a lot of aggregators. You'd mentioned the covenants of lenders. Victory Park Capital of one who's had a lot of aggregators. I'm not going to name any more names than I already have, but have not hit covenants for quarters in a row. But here's the problem. You would think if you're not hitting your covenants, you're going to call your money due. You're going to force an asset sale. You're going to do something. But here's the problem. Victory Park Capital has lent money to many aggregators. And so the rumor is, or the fear is, that if Victory Capital goes after Perch and says, we want our money now, and that hits the press, that all of their other investments are going to tank overnight. And so some of these folks who are missing covenants are not being held accountable for fear that it could destroy much of the entire industry. Some of these aggregator names that I've heard, I don't know how they're still around. I really don't. There's been so much chaos, so many layoffs. But in spite of all of this, James, there's still some good ones out there. I mentioned I'm on the board of Union Brands. They're doing really good stuff. They're doing deals. They're making sellers happy. Foreign Brands is another one that I know of that is doing things right and looking at brands to buy for the long term. And there's several others, but like I said, in the boom and bust cycle, and we're seeing the bust side now of the boom cycle of the aggregator business, there's always survivors. Amazon survived the dot-com crash and a lot of other companies, but there were many more that didn't. I think that's where we're at.
The whole contagion scenario you propose is kind of like, okay, well, what would happen, right? Because the only real problem here is that these guys' debt service fees are probably going up, right? And they still have a bunch of revenue producing companies, but it probably just can't cover the debt fees anymore. And if those things were to just get re-aggregated or repurchased, so it'd be like a reduction of their mark to market on their debt, but the businesses themselves will still be totally viable as long as they keep buying inventory, or they can keep getting debt. So yeah, it's to your point, it's hard to know, it's going to be this resplintering and then re-aggregating, or aggregators buying aggregators. I think this PE money, everyone who's behind these deals, they're real sharp. They don't care about anything other than profit and loss. And they see, there's going to be a bunch of these guys going to zero. And then why don't you just wait 6 months and buy then? I think come summertime, it's going to be the killing fields and there's going to be a lot of movement.
And some of these aggregators, though, are they really worth buying? If they bought an asset that was doing really well because the founder or owner knew what they were doing and played the Amazon game well, and all of a sudden over the last 6 months to 9 months, they've lost half their market share, what's there? What's left, right? Obviously, it's a case-by-case scenario, but I think more of the aggregators that didn't have the ability to operate well, maybe underestimated by a factor of 10 how hard running an Amazon business or DTC business is. And, some of these brands that they acquired were either bad purchases to begin with, or they're dying on the vine because they don't have the operational staff left with the right amount of experience to continue growing them. And so that's where it becomes, could you pick up some of these assets on a pennies on the dollar? Sure. But why not just go out and continue buying healthy ones if you're a smart aggregator? That's what I would say.
You'll probably just end up with a total, considered almost like a free auction or like a garage sale of the actual brand assets.
All right. Or, you go into the fiduciary through a bankruptcy proceeding and you pick up assets that might make sense for pennies on the dollar or not. By that time, what's happened to the account? What's happened to the Seller Central account, right? I mean,
right. Does the
Amazon
wholesaler even still exist?
That's right. Where are those customers? Did they move on? Did they start making their own brands? And so, it'll be interesting to see. I think that sometime around last year's Prosper show, a lot of reporters were saying, when's the shoe going to drop? They were paying a lot of close attention to it. I think, Sam Bankman-Fried and his shenanigans kind of sucked the air out of that. And there's no bigger tragedy right now than that, besides maybe the war in Ukraine. And everyone's just kind of forgotten about them, but they deserve some attention. And I just think it will restart again, and you'll start reading more stories about it, James, once one of these bigger aggregators publicly files for bankruptcy. And I think it's coming.
I think you're probably right. We have to get one of these. There's got to be a story of raised X dollars, now worth zero, and then that'll grab some people's attention, right? Because it'll be sharp falls in 2 years, right. And hopefully that's not in the middle of a broader recession and just, one of many stories of, corporate greed gone wrong. And, I'm trying to be a little more optimistic for the year as a whole, but, that doesn't feel out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah. So is that one of your predictions? Maybe you'll see a big aggregator go under finally.
Oh, I think that's almost certain. I'm not even worried about that prediction. That's just like.
All right, we'll come back next year and we'll see if it came true. I thought it was going to happen last year, so I was wrong. So I think you're right. I think there's definitely a certainty that we will see some headlines this year saying this aggregator went poof. So
which might segue the rise of brand and the rise of new channels of commerce. I think that's that's kind of the segue out of the aggregator world is, I think the smart money that's still playing around there is, and maybe this would be an interesting topic, is like the evolution of what is a business that works. Because I think the aggregator story is like the death knell of the 3 SKU brand, sells only on Amazon, 99% sales here, doesn't exist anywhere else, doesn't have a brand story or an Instagram account or anything, and is worth anything. I think the days of those brands are gone, and the rise of whatever's next is upon us.
Right on, James. You're 100% right, and you're living it, building your own brands. And just back to another aggregator, small aggregator that's maybe hasn't even made some of the top lists. I was talking to them yesterday, and they had acquired these brands that were basically commodities, where the seller went to China, looked in a showroom, picked this product that 16 other people were doing, slapped their logo on it, called it a brand. And they had bought 2 or 3 of those companies, and they've done nothing but tank. That's a hard transition, right? I mean, when I was a seller, I started out doing that. That was my first private label. I went over and did exactly what I just described. I slapped a Harville logo on that sucker and started selling it like crazy because it was cheaper than what I was buying from the other wholesale. And then over time, I learned this concept that difference better than better, and that not being the same as everything else was important. And then we kind of had to find our brand soul, and then make sure that that was infused in all of the new designs that were specific to us. There was obviously similarity. I mean, look, we were selling foosball tables and ping pong, but we could always customize those things and make that part of our brand. James, you and I have been talking about this for a long time. I don't know of anybody else who's developed as beautiful a brands as you have. And tell us what your mindset is, and what is it that sellers need to think about so that they can get maximum value from one of these folks later on, and what does it take really to build a great brand in today's world?
I think the through line of my presentations in the past has been like, stop looking for easy. And I think that's kind of been the narrative around Amazon businesses for a long time, is right, like work 2 hours a month, sell stuff through FBA. And probably what's going to happen in the next year is everybody who tried that is going to get washed out, or they're going to get educated, and they're going to like start working a little harder, right? Because I think the second you start doing anything, someone else starts eating your lunch. And so the only real durable thing is brand, and whatever that means. And, we've worked really hard to build that. I read a really good article the other day about Liquid Death, and I don't know if you've paid much attention to their rise. It's this like, it's canned water, and it just looks like Monster, but it's just like really healthy water, like low sugar. And
I've heard of the brand, but I don't know their story.
So they launched 4 years ago, and they're $700 million, I think, valuation. They're going to do like 200 million in revenue this year. And it's just this insane story of, it's just canned water, and they just absolutely crushed the branding, right? Like, it's called Liquid Death. Their tagline is murder your thirst, like everything about it. They have these hilarious commercials of like little kids drinking water, getting like drunk at parties and going crazy, like, it's just water. It's basically that. It's like, what's fun, like, stop thinking about what's easy, what's cheap, what's the simplest, fastest way to market, but, what's fun to you, what's interesting, what's a product that you actually, like to your point, want to throw your heart and soul into, and in some way reflects who you are and what you're trying to do. And so, they're a little bit harder questions. They're not much harder, but it does take a little time to sit there and really think through that. And like, all right, how do I weave that into a product that then also is price competitive, sits well in the market, is differentiated from, the people who are already there, has long-term moats, and, is expansible to other ideas and other categories, and, those kind of things. And I think if you just take, an extra week in your business building process to really answer those questions well, it'll pay off 5 years down the road. I think that's kind of, we're seeing the versions that didn't do that kind of shake out right now. And one thing I took away from the Liquid Death article that I'll just end on is he said, I think he had a great line that, he's basically an entertainment company that sells water. And if you look at their branding, it's exactly right, And so we made a pivot 2 years ago to just get almost a huge amount of competency in content production. And so now we're doing, quarterly, multi-day, multi-location shoots. We're starting to do, big time video production. We've learned a lot about, what does it take to really look good and differentiate in that way, because you can really tell on Amazon these days, like, who has the better pictures, who has, content that really speaks about who they are versus really generic things. I think that stuff's really starting to show out.
I don't know who said content is king. I don't even know if it was related to e-commerce when it was first said, but it's totally true, right? That visibility, that brand awareness, repeatedly getting out there. And there's so many great venues for you to create free content that you don't have to pay for. Throw it out there, test it, double down on the one that gets, that gets the most engagement, impressions, and clicks, and boost it. I mean, there's just great opportunities to raise brand awareness now. We're even seeing a lot of this streaming video television commercials that are really cost effective video that's going in streaming TV. I mean, obviously streaming is the future of television and television advertising. There's been a lot of media spend shifting to that, to display and to online videos. And you're so right. It's funny. I think about brand all the time Two quick stories. One, I'm driving down the highway and I look at the back of this truck. I was still in LA. Look at the back of this truck and there's a Yeti sticker on the back window of this guy's truck. And I'm like, this guy loves this brand so much and thinks this brand is so cool that he basically defaced his rear windshield, right? And stuck a sticker on it because he was that connected to the brand. And I thought, that's a freaking brand, right? I don't know how they did that, how they got there, but if you get to a point where people want your swag and they want to slap it all over their car or wear your hat, you've won. And then the other example is I was standing in line with my daughters at Starbucks waiting for my coffee. And my coffee is not very good at Starbucks. And, what the hell is tall, grande, all this? That doesn't even mean anything, right? But they took small, medium, and large and created their own language that sounds very Italian. I don't even think it translates directly to small, medium, and large in Italian, honestly. They just made up names, right? They made up names, and I get my coffee and I drink, and I'm like, really, what's different about this cup of coffee and how it makes me feel from going down to like the 50-cent diner or whatever and getting one out of the Folgers coffee? There's not a lot of difference, honestly, but it's an experience, right? The lighting is amazing. They've got these great wood paneling. All of the designs are very modern and chic and Northwesty, and it makes me feel good when I go in there, even if the coffee doesn't taste great. And, there's little things like that. And a wise advisor of mine many years ago said, you got to sprinkle the pixie dust. And to your point, it's hard, James. It's really, really hard. You got to figure out the soul of your product, and you got to sprinkle the pixie dust around there to create a brand. And then you earn that trust after sale and making customers amazed at what you're doing. And I think it comes down to that. And back to your point, it's really, really hard. And I got to tell you, James, not everyone can do it. I know this because I used to try to train folks. I hired and fired a lot of people until I found the right people that could do it for my brand. And it requires a certain talent, and I can't put my finger on it. If you asked me to write a job description, I wouldn't be able to. But again, it just comes back to the pixie dust.
I can't disagree with anything you said. I will follow on your story that I saw one of my brand stickers on someone's car like not too many weeks ago, and I was just like, I've made it.
Take a victory lap. Take a victory lap.
I was like, it's probably my buddy's buddy or something like that, That made that day or probably that week or at least that month. As far as what it takes, I think my answer is reps.
Reps. Say more.
Everyone sucks at it the first time. So like I'll give an example of like when I've started anywhere or when I've had anyone start working for me for the first year and a half, they think every idea they have is like the best thing that anyone's ever thought of, and in their head, they're like, why doesn't anyone do this? Like, what's going on? And then they come ask me and I'm like, yeah, we did that like 3 years ago. Here's what happened. It didn't work for this reason or that reason, whatever. Right. And then they're like, oh, okay. So then, they go back to work and then a month later, they're like, I got this great idea. And it's the same thing over and over and over again for like usually quite a while, 12 months, 18 months. And then finally they have a good idea. And I'm just like, that one's pretty good. Like you finally know enough, all the reasons, enough about what makes this business work to have a unique idea. Because I think, my first 10 business ideas were not very good. And, I ran them by friends. I did this, I did that, and, everyone's like poking holes and I'm like, those are good questions, like that wasn't. Okay, next idea, And I think that probably everybody who is entrepreneurial in any way kind of has that same experience. They're always like asking their wife or their friend or whatever, like, hey, what if we did this? And people are, either encouraging or whatever. But, if you really listen, people kind of tell you what they think. And you can't hit go until you find the one that like all 10 people you tell the idea to are like, not bad, and that's just reps because the first few are always going to suck. That's the same with everything, right? Like no one starts skiing on the double blacks. And it's the same with businesses. I think there's so much simple stuff that's only simple in hindsight, and you just got to go through the process.
You got to put in your reps. And the other thing that you said that I want to emphasize, if you really listen, you got to listen to your customer. And I think the third lesson that you put in there, there was so much to unpack there for our viewers and listeners, is you're going to suck at first, and that's okay. That's part of the process. Carry on, right? Keep trying, keep chipping away at it. You know, the last 2 years in a row, you've been on my Trends and Predictions panel at Prosper Show. Are you going to Prosper this year?
I don't think I got invited.
Oh, well, you got to find a way to get there one way or another. I have to do a different panel this year because it's 2 years in a row, and then the third year I got to shake it up. So I'd love to see it prosper. But I've always enjoyed our panels, March 13th through 15th. And so you got to take a look now. And if you need a discount code, let us know. If you're on our mailing list, you'll get one. I think I've enjoyed the pre-calls that we had before the panel even more, where we just throw these ideas out about trends and predictions. You know, we had our episode earlier in the year talking about what, you know, Shannon and I thought was going to come to be. But I'm really interested in what you think is going to happen. We've already got one prediction that is a near certainty, is that a big aggregator will finally go belly up in 2023. What's some more that you're thinking?
I think this year is the year of profit across the board. And I think that has a lot of downstream impacts. Us as sellers, Amazon as a marketplace, aggregators as businesses, you know, all over the place. So that's one.
If we can just get Amazon to play along and reduce their damn seller fees or wipe it out altogether, it would really help everyone in that prediction, James.
You know, I'm going to predict something happens on that this year.
Really?
I think you kind of did too in your last episode, right?
I think that they're not going to do it of their own free will. I think it's going to happen. They're going to have to do it if the California Attorney General's office wins the lawsuit that they filed against them, banning the practice of buy box suppression. So that's the only precursor to it. If that happens and the law changes on them, preventing them from doing buy box suppression, the only way they'll be able to compete, I think, is if they lower those seller fees. That was, I think, my point.
I think there's just so many pressure points on the seller fee right now. I think buy with Prime is a pressure point on it because, you know, your net take from Amazon on buy with Prime. So you're going to be able to buy traffic, buy clicks on Amazon that go to your website where you pay, I think, a 5% fee for a Prime checkout. That's one pressure point, right? You're going to basically you'll be able to buy Amazon clicks to go to your site to check out with Prime at a 10% discount. Generally, the rise of Shopify, TikTok, ChatGPT via Microsoft Bing. You know, I think there's a new era of traffic and e-commerce players coming into play. And, I think TikTok's probably going to go hard into the direct selling. Instagram and Facebook should. I don't know why they haven't, you know. So I think, to your point, you know, competition is going to eventually reduce costs. You know, I think the rev share is it's keeping prices up on Amazon at this point. It certainly is for my business. That's like the gravity of economics, right? Like eventually that immovable force will break under the whatever the other thing is, right? Like it's just going to have to give. And then I kind of think, to your point, you know, there's this whole antitrust flood of attention and competition. And I think the consumer just understands what Amazon is more than it ever has and wants quality over quantity and realizes that true brands and good products can't just go to nothing forever. And when that happens, it's because it's junk from China or junk from somewhere or counterfeit this or, you know, something that, and, you know, it's a recalibration of the equilibrium of price versus quality, durability, stuff like that. You know, I think I'm hoping that whole equation leads to something's got to give, right? Like the share Amazon takes can't just keep going up forever without something eventually breaking.
I love your comment about the new era of traffic in e-commerce. You're right. ChatGPT was something I actually wanted to talk about, so I'm glad you brought that up. It's fascinating what's happening there and what repercussions that could mean for someone like a Google. Of course, they've got their Lambda product, which they're kind of upset that they kept that under the hood instead of getting out there first to market. Whoops is right. But it is going to be a very interesting year. I think that is another certainty for sure, James. Certainly the antitrust pressure will not relent for Amazon in 2023. There were two sneaky pieces of legislation that snuck into that big spending bill at the end of December. The one that I'm most interested in is how the fees for companies that acquire other companies are going to skyrocket. And the estimate is that Lena Khan and her counterpart at the DOJ can get, up to $1 billion in fees in their coffers to hire enough lawyers to combat the skyrise building full of lawyers that Amazon and the big tech companies have. So I think a lot more pressure from the DOJ and the FTC, even if the Amazon, I should say, the legislators can't get their act together and pass the Klobuchar-Grassley bill. I'm really fascinated by your comment about that new era of traffic and e-commerce is coming. What are you doing as a brand to prepare for this? Are there things that you're doing differently now that you wouldn't have done, even thought about doing, say, 3 years ago?
Well, I had pretty much written off other e-commerce marketplaces as never. And I'm on the verge of making my first bulk shipment to Walmart, so that's, I think, one.
Well, hey,
that's one sea change, in my business. It's like my brain is back open to other opportunities, because I don't think Amazon has the lock on customer eyeballs that they did for the last 15 years. And I've been hearing that from a lot of people, right? Like nothing's ever broken the seal, but now a lot of people are like, well, hey, Walmart's 10, 15%, like this is meaningful,
Yes.
And I think the same thing. So there's two categories. There's brand owners who start on Amazon and then go out, right?
Yep.
And every one of those that I know is doing everything they can to diversify away from Amazon and
Bingo.
with
the smart ones, for sure.
Right. And then there's the other version, which is like we started off Amazon, we figured out how to, get Instagram, we got our presence there, we do our own stuff, we buy traffic here, and they're all holding out on Amazon and doing everything they can to like develop clout outside of Amazon. And so, I think it eventually kind of leads to, if you're the person in charge of selection at Amazon, you realize that at some point you have a hard stick, that is just like, I can't keep getting stuff that people want to buy with this objection in the middle of the, like it's gumming up the works. And I think they'll make enough money from their ads, and that some of that stuff's going to have to give, and there's going to be enough effective channels to get people interested in a product and to purchase it outside of Amazon without ever touching Amazon, that it becomes significant, and it kind of starts to make them question their priors. It's kind of what I see coming a little bit, and I think it's certainly what I hope comes, and I'm going to participate in every way I can to make that true.
I love it, James. Always great to connect and always great to hear your thoughts. You're a deep thinker, and you have been in the room with Bezos himself and built amazing brands and had an exit. And it's always a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Oh, let me ask you one more question. I heard this ridiculous headline that Bezos will come back and run Amazon. True or false?
No way.
What do you think?
I mean, I don't know anything.
Way, right? No way. I thought the same thing. No way in hell. He's got too many rocket aspirations, and
dude, he's chilling on yachts.
Yeah. I wanted to jump into the interview that I saw, I think it was CNBC or something, and say, do you really think that Jeff Bezos wants to be dragged in front of Congress one more time? That ain't going to happen.
I think he's on to the next
we debunked
thing.
one prediction from someone else.
Yeah. I'm with you.
Yeah. Awesome. James, tell us, where can our listeners go and find your brands? What's the brand names? What's the URL? Where can they go and get your great stuff?
Oh, my two big ones that I'm really spending all my time on is Woolly Clothing, which is all merino clothing, for every part of life. Our whole thing is more wool, less plastic. So if you want to get in on that, you can find us at woolly.clothing. That's the website. And then the other one it's called Bloom City. We call that fixing fertilizer. So this is all made in America. It's chemical, very low chemical. You call them biostimulants. So it's things that make your soil and your plants and everything just work better without stuffing them full of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And that's at bloom.city. That's our website, or on Amazon for both those brands, obviously. So
I love it, James. I'm going to be all over Woolly because I just moved from LA to the Northwest and I need warmer clothes. So
you need this for sure.
I definitely. So I'm going to be your biggest customer in 2023. So thanks for making great product. Everybody, thanks for listening. If you're ready to start growing and protecting your brand on Amazon with a team of experienced Amazon operators, you can visit us at day2podcast.com. That's day2podcast.com. And lastly, if you know of anyone else who would gain value from this podcast, please share it with them. Thanks for listening and happy selling.